Hello, I'm Becopin, and this is 36 Years, where we talk about Philippine politics, news, and democracy. We are back because last week medyo naloka ako sa dami na nangyari sa first full week of the Marcos presidency. We'll be talking about that later because on May 9, the Philippines elected Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as president. He is the second Marcos to hold the post, the first being his father, the dictator who was ousted from power on February 25, 1986, in what is now known as the People Power Revolution. That was 36 years ago. Here we try to answer the question, where is Philippine democracy heading 36 years after the revolution? Welcome to 36 Years, available on Rappler social media pages and on wherever you listen to podcasts. And in this episode, we talk about the people who run around Malacanang, Padre Faura, Batasan, the most august halls of the Senate, and the different departments of government in Metro Manila and beyond to make sense in real time, hopefully, the administration's policies and plans. Let's talk about covering the administration. But first, headlines you should not miss. Face-to-face classes, not the show. Following President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s announcement that the DepEd would roll out a plan for all schools, as in lahat, to return to face-to-face classes, the Department of Education, headed by Vice President Sara Duterte, ordered all private and public schools to return to in-person classes by November 2022. Again, this is mandatory. Why this is important? The Philippines is among the last in the world to return to in-person classes, and safety restrictions were put in place because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But at the same time, the order comes at a crucial time. We're dealing with another surge in COVID-19 cases, although the good news is that the Philippines remains at low risk for the virus. The return to face-to-face classes was among the first things the president discussed when he convened his cabinet for the first time on July 5, his first Tuesday in office. President Marcos discussed two major issues, the pandemic and transportation, through the lens of the return of face-to-face classes. So you know it is a big deal, top of mind siya ng cabinet. And speaking of firsts and the cabinet, here's how Marcos's first week in office went. Marcos Week 1, positives, negatives. On his first full day as president, Marcos vetoed House Bill number 7575, or the Bulacan Airport City Special Economic Zone and Freeport Act, saying, quote, "I cannot support the bill considering the provisions that pose fiscal risks to the country and its infringement on or conflict with other agencies' mandates and authorities." Speaking to media on July 4, Secretary Trixie Cruz Angeles said the law has to be sharpened because, quote, "We have to make anticipations of possible constitutional challenges on this one. It will cause further delays if the law is challenged and invalidated." Ironically, or interestingly enough, Senator Amy Marcos, President Marcos's sister, sponsored HB 7575 in the Senate as chair of the Committee on Economic Affairs. The president also issued his first two executive orders, although they were released to the public belatedly, as in 1 week after pinirma yung mga EOs na yon ay nilabas sila sa media. The first two EOs deal with streamlining government, rearranging offices, and abolishing at least one, the Presidential Anti-Corruption Commission. This is different from the PCGG. The PACC is a recreation of former President Rodrigo Duterte meant to investigate presidential appointees. Secretary Angeles said that the PACC is not in line with streamlining. Another priority of the president, the economy. Di ko tatapusin yon, pero alam niyo na yon. The economic team briefed the cabinet during their first meeting, and although we weren't briefed on the details of that briefing yet, the president did emphasize his priority as agriculture chief, because he is both president and head of the agriculture department, to make sure that Filipinos can afford food. President Marcos, again, is also the Secretary of Agriculture. We talked about that a little more in Newsbreak chat, so you can watch that. And while the economic team briefed the entire cabinet, Marcos, in his first ever media briefing as president, said he, quote, "disagreed with the inflation rate," which was made public just hours after the July 5 meeting, the cabinet meeting began. A day after, on July 6 naman, Finance Chief Ben Jocno claimed the president was misunderstood and that he was referring to the year-to-date figure. But in the press briefing the day before, Marcos was clearly responding to a question about the June 2022 6.1 inflation rate. He has not explained why he disagreed, and it's been hard to catch him since because in his first week of office, the president caught COVID 19. He has been in isolation since Friday, July 8th, is recovering and should be back doing in-person work by Friday this week or July 15. Sabi ko sa'yo, ang dami nangyari sa first week. But here's what did not happen. Finally, even as we speak of the return to face-to-face classes, improving vaccination efforts, and a president diagnosed with COVID-19 as of July 12, wala pa rin po tayong health secretary. The Marcos cabinet is also without a housing chief and a science and technology chief, among other missing appointments. Marcos has announced his pick to be energy chief, but Rafael Lotilla is only a nominee until the palace clarifies his employment status. The law bars an officer, external auditor, accountant, or legal counsel of any private company or enterprise primarily engaged in the energy industry from being energy secretary at least 2 years after they exit their corporate role. So kung yun nga, kung nakalista ka doon, isa kang officer, external auditor, whatever of an energy company, bawal ka maging energy secretary. The palace has yet to clarify if Lotilla, who is an independent director of both Aboitiz Power Corp and of oil and gas exploration and production company ACE Annexor, is qualified given that provision. They have also yet to clarify why they announced Lotilla as a nominee in the first place, considering di pa nila apparently na-finalize yung possible liability na yon. Tony Yulo Loizaga, meanwhile, has been nominated Environment Chief. Nomination again lang for now. And those are the headlines. Napakahaba ng headlines natin because we've just finished the first week of the Marcos administration and a lot has happened. And a lot has not, and a handful of things have been delayed. I have to say though, although if you check Rappler and you check my job title, senior is part of my job title. And even if I've covered politics in the previous administrations, when it comes to covering politics, Philippine electoral systems and governance, I'm in the greater scheme of things, medyo marami pa akong kailangan i-learn, hopefully in the coming administration. This is perhaps to give you an insight into life in media and in Rappler in particular. We get by because of mentors who've mastered and are still mastering the craft, and those who have years and sometimes even decades of experience ahead of us. My guest today is one of our mentors and bosses in Rappler. Inday Espina Verona is our head of regions. Mahaba-habang introduction to. She started her journalism career as a reporter in Bacolod, a stringer for Agence France Presse, later moving on to becoming editor for Manila-based media groups, including ABS-CBN Citizen Journalism Arm and Integrated News Department. She has many awards to her name na pwede mong i-google na lang at ma-search sa Rappler site because if isa-isahin natin sila, baka maabutan pa tayo ng week 2 ng Marcos administration. But salamat, Inday, for joining me.
Salamat, Bea. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Natutuwa ako dun sa headlines mo.
At sorry din kasi for full disclosure, dapat si Inday ay guest natin last week. Kaso last week, kailangan ko lumipad ng Malacanang kasi biglang nag-decide si President Marcos mag-press briefing for the first time as president. Doon nga niya sinabi na he disagrees with inflation. But anyway, it's tapos na first week of the Marcos presidency. We are on our second week. What has surprised you and what has not? And what has alarmed you? Pero let's start siguro with the surprise. What surprises you?
What surprised me? I'm actually pleasantly surprised that even if he does fumble, and of course, you know, probably a new president would, he's been trying his best, to face the media, which is a far cry from the very, very, very reluctant way towards the press that he had during the campaign. That's always, of course, just the fact that he sits down and talks to the press is, it's a plus. Okay. Ano ba yung ating mga trigger stuff sa unang araw niya? I hope that the Marcos administration does not repeat the habit of the Duterte administration of a cabinet secretary having to explain the morning after to modify, to tweak a president's remarks, no? Mas ang kanya naman, pwede rin naman talagang hindi niya na-gets yung ano, I have seen that he's not also the most articulate,
Yeah.
person, but well, will give him A for effort there. Okay.
Yeah.
Ang ang aking hindi ko magets is ito bang is on the attacks against citizens on the issue of civil liberties, the issue of human rights, where he was really silent then during his
Yeah.
inaugural. um, I get a sense of feeling. I'm not sure if good cup, bad cup ba ang Pilipino dito.
Mhm.
Somebody says, okay, bawal ang red tagging the other, tapos biglang may papasok, no, na stronger, na red tagging pa rin and all those things. So, nothing horrendous. I mean, in the first week. Of course, I'd like to know how hindi lang si Mr. Marcos ang nag-COVID, no? So that's
Yeah.
interesting to see ilan ba talaga silang nag-COVID doon, and but I think given that the education, maraming questions dito sa education, sa reopening ng classes, that
Yeah.
I think if if they would just sit and discuss this properly with media, mas madali instead of people trying to second guess what they mean. For example, okay, November, everybody back to school.
Yeah.
The president said he may rethink the mask mandate if maganda yung booster shot. That's fine,
Yeah.
that seems prudent. But
Yeah.
papasok tayo doon, ano ba talaga ang ating vax rates, especially sa mga provinces, ang baba-baba ng iba, lalo na ang booster, inaamin naman, no? The government
Mhm.
admits that the booster rate
Nag-slow
is
down.
nag-slow down. So, how do you balance? People who've been stuck at home for the last, what, almost 3 years na, um, would really love to get life back to normal. But at the same time, it would really help alleviate concerns, it would boost confidence, if klaro, nilalatag. Which is why you were right, Bea. We're really looking forward to that appointment of the health secretary. You know.
Yeah, like honestly, nung pumasok kami ng Malacanang for the first briefing, parang we all expected na itatanong pa ba natin sino yung health secretary? Siguro naman by today magkakaroon na tayo. Kaya nga siguro pinatawag tayo para in person. Parang yun yung hope. Yun yung assumption siguro ng media that's been covering him. And in fact, parang hindi ko nabanggit sa headlines, pero the day after the first cabinet meeting, he did meet with IATF, health officials, PhilHealth, to talk about vaccination. Pero yung elephant in the room, sino yung sino yung alter ego mo to man all these efforts. Ako, honestly, nagulat ako ng very, very slightly um, that the economic team briefed the cabinet was given na yun, dapat lang. Pero nagulat nga ako na parang top of mind talaga na yung face-to-face classes, return to face-to-face.
Well, let's put it this way. The Philippines is a
Mm.
young country, meaning majority ng population natin babata, no?
Mm-mm.
Until we actually get to a point where young people are allowed normal lives, mukhang hindi babangon ang economy natin, Bea. And I think
Yeah.
basically that's where they're coming from. And probably it's right. Maayos lang nila ang safeguards. I think it's a good thing. Hindi lang, if I am hoping that Mr. Marcos listens to scientists this time, and okay, to technocrats who are not just loudmouth politicians or generals with knee-jerk reflexes that everybody should obey. If we
Yeah.
should do that, we may start seeing normalization of our lives. Pero it makes sense. Yung
Yeah.
education, it's not just about the education; it's that big segment
Yeah.
of the population.
Yeah. normalization. You talked about yung appointments ka. I think yung interesting so far if sa cabinet composition, although we have yet to like really tally, no? Parang halo-halo siya. Clearly, may political concessions, like allies, very strong supporters of 2022. Not to say anything about their qualifications, no? Pero parang you have to highlight that fact. Like, for example, Cristina Frasco, the former Liloan mayor, was one of the original talaga na talagang ra-ra-ra unit team supporters that even before Governor Garcia endorsed the tandem. Talagang si Cristina Frasco was solidly behind both Bongbong Marcos and Sara Duterte sa mga things like that. But then you have, I'm not sure if it's too early to call them technocrats per se. Baka din kasi may personal connections kaya sila na-appoint sa cabinet. But like, you do have a lot of interesting and pero yung picks that people in their industry, well, that sounds bad when you say industry, no? Kasi parang insider, insider na pick lang. Pero parang, like for example, si Lotilio, although again, malabo yung status niya, hindi natin alam kung sumama pa siya sa cabinet meeting kanina kasi nominee lang siya. But a lot, like the general feedback has been, oh, he's a good choice, he's competent theoretically for the job. So it's interesting, that combination.
Well, yeah, Mr. Lutilia, for example, he's really he's respected. He's seen as an honest broker, you know,
Yeah.
um, and even if some of the quote unquote technocrats may have had ties with, let's say, even the like Gloria and whatever,
Yeah.
relatively ang napili ni Mr. Marcos sa kanyang cabinet in the economic side of things seem to have the respect of 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 business and
Yeah.
multilateral agencies na very important. Ang joke ko nga is he's got veteran smooth operators sa economy and he's
Yeah.
got the gung-ho boys in the political positions, you know, to put it mildly. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. And if that's and I'm not too sure how big a role other political forces have in this
Mm.
uniteam government because it is, let's
Yeah.
not forget, it is a uniteam government. It's not just a Marcos government. It's a
Uh,
government that is made possible by the uniteam, and that includes Sara Duterte and
yeah.
Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. So I'm not too sure which carries weight where,
Yeah.
but it does show some very clever um, positioning, I think. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past that Mrs. Arroyo, the former president, the congresswoman woman, has had to say here,
Yeah.
because during her 9 long years in the presidency, she was praised for the economy and,
Yeah.
of course, pilloried for the gross human rights violations her government um, did. No? So interesting to see if this will happen or if the young Marcos has indeed at least let some lessons sip into his mind.
Yeah. He's been very opaque about that, no? Like ako personally, even as someone who's closely covered him during the elections, he doesn't put his heart on his sleeve. Like you're not. Parang if he talks about his father, the late dictator, parang snippets and very predictable things, like he reveres him as his father, of course, pero parang one, because we don't really have a chance to ask him na parang, sir, ano bang, di ba, ano bang may learning, well, he was asked kung anong learnings niya, pero like, that was a sit-down interview, it wasn't like a chance interview na kumbaga, spontaneous or parang, off the cuff lang na remark in that way, right?
He doesn't seem to be a very spontaneous person.
Oh,
He
yeah.
does seem guarded, which is probably not a bad thing after our last stream of consciousness, no filter leader. You know, um, that's probably not such a bad thing, but it's interesting also to see that um, behind hindi ko pa rin makakalimutan, Bea, sa inaugural
Mm.
speech niya,
Yeah.
sabi ko nga I wrote na he doesn't have the Ilocano bite of the father. His
Mm.
voice actually has the lilt, the Visayan, some of the Visayan lilt of Imelda Marcos, you know. So he comes on really charming, and sabi ko, ang baba talaga ng bar natin, ano. Happy tayo lahat. Hindi lang makalunas lang tayo ng 2 oras na walang mura at walang insulto at walang ano. Parang okay, given that, and he was charming.
Yeah.
You'll have to give President
Yeah.
Marcos that he can be very charming in a
Yeah.
quiet way, no, in a very
Yeah.
different way from Duterte.
Yeah.
But once na, wow, okay, ang galing. Once I went back and listened, then I started sitting up, pataas na pataas, pa straight ang likod ko. Hanggang tumayo ako and said, what the hell did I hear there? Because talagang taliwas, diretso Bea, nagsinungaling siya. Yun lang.
Mm. Yeah. No, actually, I was like in the moment, I was pleasantly surprised listening to him speak that speech. Primarily because in the whole campaign, kasi both him and now Vice President Sara Duterte, they stuck to a stump speech. Like kahit anong probinsya man sila pumunta, kahit si Sara Duterte mapunta pa sa Visayas speaking na province, she rarely and he rarely deviated from the speech. So I think one of the refreshing part. And in retrospect, even yung speech ni Vice President Duterte sa Davao, I remember I told you and Pia sa live na it was refreshing to hear her talk about these things. Now I'm not really second guessing, pero napapaisip ako, refreshing ba siya? Kasi refreshing siya by itself or refreshing siya because these two personalities who are now president and vice president, we only heard kumbaga a canned speech from them the whole campaign period. So parang, we actually haven't heard from Sara Duterte since she assumed her office. Like, hindi pa siya nagpe-press conference, wala pa siyang parang media or kahit nga parang off-the-cuff na public interaction. Like, most of it has been through speeches and mga commencement exercises. So, interesting din to see kung ano yung psyche ni Sara Duterte at this point.
At least we know her as Davao City Mayor. As Davao City Mayor, she could talk she could talk policy. I mean, I'll grant her that. You know, she could be very eloquent when talking policy. I think these are again the sons of rather infamous people,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so they're the children of infamous people. So they're really guarded. So two things, Bea. Either they have exemplary message discipline to the point of driving all of us crazy during the
Yeah.
campaign, or else they 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 really they really need time pa to
Mm.
explore yung leadership nila after the fact of getting into Malacanang, no?
Yeah.
But ano yan. So hindi natin alam in this sense, blank ano sila
Yeah.
blank pages ang dalawang yan,
Yeah.
no? So nangangapala, which is actually a good thing for them dahil parang ang feeling na ibang tao, babanat ba tayo? Teka muna, anong babanatan natin? Wala pa masyad. Wala no? Si Duterte hindi po umupo ng away na ng tao. Itong
Yeah.
dalawa parang, okay, saan tayo patutungo dito? So,
Yeah. Parang bold policy decisions though, like for example Sara Duterte as first order as Department of Education chief was to mandate, like hindi man lang kumbaga hindi man lang highly encouraged or whatever, and not
oo,
even hybrid. Ang gusto niya ay
diretso.
100%
Oo.
face to face, mandated lahat ng private and public schools. So
Yun nga,
very strong policy
mandate,
pronouncements. Yeah.
yeah, mandate, and as you noted before, yung cabinet nila, yung pinag-uusapan nila sa cabinet was always going there. So
Yeah.
medyo mukhang meron silang method, no?
Yeah.
Mukhang hindi sila bara-bara, at least
Yeah.
on this score, you know.
Yeah. And also I thank you for pointing that out, no. Parang kumbaga adding to the long list of contradictions of this Unity Team Alliance na they, they're blank slates as personalities, pero napaka kumbaga yung libro nila, yung first 5 chapters pa lang, punong-puno na nung legacy, for better or worse, na bit-bit nila dahil of who their fathers are. But that's the weird thing. We don't really have, they don't have, the public doesn't have clear insights into who they are as people and as leaders, which is kind of strange considering that they're the top two officials of the land.
Yes, for now, we can say this, parang caricature pa sila sa tao, which was
Yeah.
all good for their social media, ano,
Oh yeah.
disinformation and social media aggrandizing always falls back on caricatures. Kasi mas
Yeah.
madaling mahubog yan, ano. What do we know about the Sara? We know that, matapang na babae, nanuntok ng sheriff. So, dahil she was supposedly defending the poor informal settlers um, who were being driven out of
Yeah.
the land they were staying on, which is an which plays
To
to
the
that
Duterte
wow,
brand.
astig ang Mindanao, di ba? Ganon.
Yeah.
And totally forgets that may mga batas na nagsasabing hindi ka pwedeng bumuhat
Yeah.
ng kamay mo ng ganyan-ganyan lang. So,
Yeah.
mas favorable sa kanila. Kay Marcos Jr., of course, that would be more hindi masyado maganda because, there was that little boy soldier, the spoiled
Yeah.
kid, ganon. So, at of course, from all the movies recently na lumabas na parang um, the entire burden of of the Marcos comeback dream was on his shoulders. If we
Yeah.
believe the movies, okay? Parang gano'n ang labas ba? Parang kawawa siya. Parang si mother na
Yeah.
parang go, parang ano. So we don't know kung ano yung mga motivations, what's really inside them. And maybe partly he doesn't know it either, but
Yeah.
other people can fly or crash
Yeah.
during crisis.
Yeah.
And if there ever was a crunch time for Ferdinand Marcos Jr., this is it.
Alam mo yun, dahil nabanggit mo yung movie, yung playing like a movie. You know what felt like a movie scene? May 9, 10 p.m. when the initial results were transmitted na, kung hindi kayo nanood nung stream ng Rappler, kami ni Ma'am Inday yung on live on air nung saktong moment na yon na pumasok na yung transparency server, no? And ako personally, my mind was just panicking because I was the anchor and I was supposed to read out. So may mga like how are we supposed to do this? Is the graphics ready and stuff like that? But I wonder, we haven't talked about this yet. Like what was going through your head nung first na bagsak nung results? Kita mo agad din napakalaki, as in talagang laki na ng lead kaagad. Di man lang binigyan ng chance na maghabulan dun sa election results.
Actually, ang pumasok sa ulo ko, di ba, syempre, kailangan nating calm and collected. Di ba? Ganun. Parang na pumasok sa ulo ko na, I expected this, but wow, not this
Yeah.
fast, not this big. Ganon yung ano. And, and then immediately, pinag-uusapan, and briefly, no, napag-usapan natin yata, but very briefly, we didn't really get into that. Ang sunod na pumasok sa ulo ko is, Pilipinas, paano nangyari ito? No?
Mm.
And of course, we've heard from many people, many theories about what has happened. Primarily, a big portion of the critics of Mr. Marcos will blame disinformation and the
Yeah.
fact that it has been building up for the last 2 decades, no, which
Yeah.
is also probably true. But I
Yeah.
don't think we should ever stop there lang, no?
Yeah.
Because that in disinformation would never have taken root if we didn't already have systemic weaknesses in our society. And I think, Bea, and Paco, para kung sirang plaka nito hate na ako ng iba dito kasi kahit sinong mga administrasyon inuulit ko hanggat hindi natin, tingnan ang sarili natin,
Yeah.
the so-called betters of society who want to pontificate on political issues, until we look and see what we have done that's been bad, and what we have refused to do, the hard things that we should have
Mm.
done, I think paulit-ulit lang ang cycle na ito.
Not to date you or whatever, no, pero parang nabanggit ko nga kanina, sa reportorial team ng Rappler, ako na si Ate Bea, kumbaga. Kasi I just,
Mamaya lola na yung tawag sa akin, Bea.
because I just realized the other day, I don't know, it took, siguro self-denial, kaya it took me so long. This is my third administration under Rappler because when I entered Rappler mga almost midway through the Aquino administration in 2012, and then of course the entire Duterte administration, and now the start of the Marcos administration. Now, nabanggit mo kanina yung parang the things that we failed to do, or we neglected to notice even through the decades since 1986. I reflect on that because as journalists, I feel like sometimes because we have to report on things, we don't and think about things, we don't actually get to really think about them in the bigger picture right away. May mga things ba na siguro, are there some things or issues that you feel like I should have seen that when I was reporting on it originally?
Um, Hindi, kasi it's not that I'm a know-it-all, Bea, but
Yeah.
I think, like, for example, when people were saying Duterte was a buffoon, blah, 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 no? Very early, when he hadn't even really officially, filed his certificate of candidacy. Sinabi ko na yata na the biggest mistake um, Duterte's enemies will do is if they keep on believing on their propaganda that he's a buffoon, because
Yeah.
he's not. He has
Yeah.
managed to play different political forces with a very skilled, cunning hand, and
Yeah.
and while you may hate him for that, and I'm not using hate in a loose way. I really hate human rights abusers.
Yeah.
Though you may hate him for the the total malevolence of his human rights viewpoint,
Mm-mm.
um, opposing him should never have made people close their eyes to the very real skills and
Yeah.
talents that he had. And I think in doing that, they really fell. He really played the opposition all the way up hanggang sa
Yeah.
dulo. I mean, 2019,
Oh yeah.
parang, di ba? And at the same time, 2019 was a debacle, which is, again, repeated right now. No? Pero parang, di pa rin natuto.
Yeah.
Tapos, isa pang sabi ko noon is that until we get over the fiction that it was just disinformation that Duterte made Duterte win, and do not acknowledge the the chasms in society
Yeah.
that allowed all this, all this miasma of lies to snake in, then wala talaga. Hindi mananalo. You will never be able to correct. And while it was exciting to see the voluntarism of the pink campaign, um, nakita na rin, I think, natin na
Yeah.
that's not gonna work. You know.
Yeah.
But
And
hopefully, Bea, post-election, yung mga fire up ng volunteers, hindi titigil. Tumigil man ang traditional political umbrella nila, I think they should continue, even in the barangay levels, to keep
right.
that fire burning, to fight
Right.
for their space in a democracy.
Because I think also a lot of people, and not just even, kasi what I observed in 2022 is a lot of people who normally do not care about elections, do not care about Philippine politics, were awoken, suddenly attended rallies, poured their own money into not just Leni Robredo's campaign itself, pero lahat ng mga sangay-sangay na volunteer organizations na, but not just them, the newer ones in Philippine politics, even the more veteran people, I think we tend to forget that it takes a long time to build up to something. Like for example, itong the Marcos resurgence was not built overnight. It wasn't built nga just a decade ago. Technically, it was built over 36 years. Parang the moment they fled the Philippines and were forced into Hawaii, parang nag-start na ulit yung rebuilding nun, 'di ba? Parang paunti-unti. Um, and Duterte maybe accelerated it a bit. Who knows what would have happened if Duterte did not precede Ferdinand Marcos? But what I mean to say is lang, yes, inspiring yung pink rallies, but like it doesn't have like these things. You can't undo these things overnight. Is I think the bitter pill to swallow.
Yes, I think kailan nagsimula? February? Sige, sabihin pa
Yeah.
natin December.
Totoo.
Okay.
Totoo.
Kung titingnan natin lahat, okay, sabihin na natin age of social media revolutions like the Arab Spring, the
Yeah.
Orange, But, ang nakita natin na dramatic episodes may have taken 2 months, but these were built up through years. Hindi
Exactly.
to, this was, all those revolutions were not crafted together four, in 4 months, no?
Yeah.
Matagal sila nagbuno ng pagod ang mga tao diyan. So, siguro if those who would have wanted a change in Philippine politics, and we're not just because I think this isn't just about Lenny. I think
Yeah.
this is what people who really wanted change, who saw that Lenny was the one who would give it, but who also knew that they would not be blind followers of Lenny. No, I
Yeah.
think I think if they just continued what they had started, and if only the former vice president encourages this, kahit hindi na ito sumali, just
Yeah.
encourage this, um, then I think that tinatawanan ako dahil sabi ko, okay, we're going to have 2 generations to dislodge the dynasties. But we need to start somewhere. We can't wait
Yeah.
for until months before every election to start doing it all over again. Tama si
Yeah.
John Nery. Nakinabasa mo ba yung column ni John?
Yeah.
Angat buhay, an NGO will never be enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not, no NGO can change society. Ano ba? Ganon,
Yeah.
NGO, it's an NGO. It's
Yeah.
people, it's movements that change
Yeah.
society.
Yeah, and that's a lot of work. And hopefully, again, ako hopefully, because I covered in the first months of the Duterte administration, I covered the opposition. I remember it was such a struggle to get information about what they were doing because there was nothing. There was nothing to report on. So yun yung struggle ko rin na how do I report on nothing? And siguro foreshadowing na rin yun na the first few months of 2016 under Duterte was a foreshadowing of 2019, which was a foreshadowing of the May 9 elections, no, na parang we're still not doing the difficult, honestly, non-inspiring hard work. Kasi yung hard work that we're talking about, hindi ito pang social media minsan. Yung mga grassroots na campaigning, hindi siya mag-viral kasi parang
Di siya sexy.
kakausap,
No.
hindi siya sexy, hindi siya, but hopefully as we speak, I assume groups have been starting to, and again, yung nga, correct, beyond Angat Buhay, beyond Lenny Robredo, like this should, and I think Lenny Robredo made that clear din naman in a way na parang, by passing on the torch to Senator Ontiveros, um, in a literal manner sa speech niya nung oath taking ni Senator Risa na parang clear na siya na mag-ano tayo, parang kailangan mag-move on at mag-step up na serious yung movement na to. I was asking that because yun nga parang I think personally it took me a few days also to like just process May 9. Not so much because I didn't believe what happened or the results of the election, but it's also because you need to prepare and accept what happened because you're gonna cover the incoming administration, right? Which is what I'm doing now. Um, gusto ko lang mag-throwback ng konti, Inday. Parang, what drew you in the first place to journalism?
Well, okay. I do come from a family of writers, of
Mm.
journalists. My dad was a journalist. My grand aunt was both a novelist and a journalist. My great grand uncle,
Oh,
or the
wow.
or the brother of my Lola's father, was Graciano Lopezina, who was, of course, a
Oh
journalist
my
in the
gosh.
propaganda movement. So, so mukhang nasa dugo talaga. Although my mom was a Dr. Bea, so ang pagkuha ko ng sa UP was as pre-med because ano rin ako, tambay ako as my mom said, baka itong mag-doktor kasi tambay ng emergency room. Ang bandang huli sabi niya na lang na hindi pala talaga medicine ang interest niya, kundi yung mga kwento sa emergency room. Ganon. But I did love medicine, except that when I I was lucky enough to come from a family with both my while we were sheltered in the economic sense of the word. Um, my parents were both liberal enough to really show us. Si dad kasi ano yan dati, executive assistant nung governor. So he was all the ups and downs of the Marcos dictatorship. My mother was the head of the pediatrics department of the regional hospital when Joel Abong died, when the Batang
Mm-hmm.
Negros died. She was
Oh.
in charge of that. So, naka-ringside seat kami dyan lahat. And they would answer all our questions. So, in that sense, um, ano talaga, walang, parang, I gravitated to it. I took a look. I knew when I went into UP that I wanted to be involved in politics and activism. Even as a fourth year high school, I knew that was what I wanted. Because nga, hindi tinago ng parents ko yung katotohanan, even if you could say they work for the government. No?
Yeah.
So, yun, nung nakita ko yung syllabus, sabi ko, ay, pwede ba ako mag-journalism na lang? Nagalit ka sa akin. Eh. Quota course yan eh, tapos tinatapon-tapon mo lang, sige na, okay. And that's the way it is. I think I've always been writing naman eh. I was
Yeah.
editor of the school papers in elementary and in high school, and it's the thing that I love. I still love the most, you know. So, yun lang yun.
I wonder, and I hope I don't romanticize this because I'm very I always catch myself romanticizing things that I did not live through. No, what was it like? Parang kumbaga being a young adult in your formative years in a way, because I consider my 20s up to my mid 20s my formative years. Parang covering the rebirth of the system that we know now. I also ask that kasi I think a lot of people tend to forget na medyo bago pa yung democracy natin relatively ha. Maybe because ano nga, because like siguro the millennial generation, we were born si Cory na or si even Ramos na. So we tend to forget and sometimes take for granted na the martial law years under Ferdinand Marcos wasn't that long ago. Like, alam mo yun?
Oo.
So I wonder, what was it like, the whole experience of,
I
seeing
was
the return of them?
I was, let's say, 19
Yeah.
when I went back to the province and started my career in journalism. And
19?
oo, magte-20, almost nandun na, oo. Nag-drop out ako eh, and so I said, I don't want, at that
Okay.
time, our generations, that was the last, 1980, ang pasok ko sa UP, that's the
Mm-mm.
generation that ended, the dictatorship, di ba? Ganon. So, nung pumunta ako doon, meron na, bumalik na yung mga media, no? And yet, nangangapa. Kasi nga,
Mm-mm.
siyempre, for a long time, wala sila. No? And then takot lahat. So, I was
Mm-mm.
part of a small alternative group that's called Cobra Ants. We created that group precisely so we could help our colleagues in media, in Bacolod and Negros media, to understand the issues, to and to say it in a way na hindi naman sila agad masusunog, pero in a
Yeah.
way that would allow them to stretch and stretch and stretch. The very real censorship that still continue to that day. So
Yeah.
yun ang pride namin. And then across the country, small alternative groups also cropped up, and we all worked together in a network called the Philippine News and Features that was that was managed by the Catholic Church. At that time, the
Mm.
church really was played a big part in pushing for democratization. No? So yun, and at the same time, I was stringing for the wire agencies, and after the fall of the Marcos dictatorship, so people seem to think that everything was okay. Hindi, kasi
Yeah.
nagbabangayan ang right wing, ang left wing, and
Yeah.
everything doon, di ba? And may coup, di ba? Several coups.
Yeah.
Oh, and in the provinces, especially in my province, Negros
Yeah.
Occidental,
Yeah.
where which was ruled by um, landlords,
Yeah.
sugarcane farm
Yeah.
landlords. Grabe ang resma ng
Yeah.
right-wing, ano. Kasi they were disappointed. Of course, they hated Marcos because his cronies like Benedicto rubbed them blind, even if they were also very irresponsible stewards of the land. Inamin naman
Yeah.
na nila ngayon eh. And yet, so, nag-Cory sila. And then kay Cory, nag-land reform, nag-agrarian reform, because Cory had to do it. She had progressives also behind her. She couldn't just, ano, um, nagalit sila kay Cory. Guno sila, nag-right wing naman sila, ganon. Of course, Cory had to play around. So, ang gulo-gulo nun, Bea. Doon pa lang, noon pa lang kaya hindi bago sa akin ang red tagging. Noon pa, nire-red tag na kami. Can you imagine, ano yun meeting ng Peace and Order Council, which we still have that today, no? So kami
Mm.
naman, cover kami, and we go into a hall, and suddenly I hear our name. Parang, hindi,
Oh my
pangapangalan
God.
namin. And then I see a big screen, and it says enemies of the state. And nandun yung mga pangalan namin, Cobra Ants, Inday, Espina, parang,
Oh
gano'n.
my
Parang,
God.
okay, gano'n. Um, So, so noon pa, yung enemies of
Yeah.
the state na yan, recycled hogwash na yan.
Yeah.
Recycled na yan.
Yeah.
But it was scary.
Yeah, no, I know we're laughing, but I'm trying. I don't. If I was 19 or in my early 20s,
Mga
I'm
21 na
trying
ako
to.
na, nung pagkatapos, 87. Oo. Ganun.
Tinatry ko imagine sarili ko kung nasa Butuan ako, tapos nire-red tag ako habang nagka-cover ako ng isang meeting. Hindi ko alam kung anong gagawin ko. Siguro tinakas na ako ng parents ko or something like that. Um, but no, thank you for that anecdote because I think that it also puts a spotlight on the unique struggles of being a journalist outside of Metro Manila, especially if you're outside of Mega Manila kasi may Laguna, may mga ganun pa naman
Oo.
na Cavite nearby, but um and I feel like we don't talk about it enough. Although I know, like Rappler, for example, we talk about this a lot, like the struggles of regional reporters or report journalists based in the regions. Have things changed since nung fateful years of you finding yourself red tagged in a meeting that you were supposed to cover?
No, as late as what? We have Frenchie Kimpo. She's in jail in Leyte, no, Eastern Vistas, Frenchie Kimpo. Um, we've had Con Corrales and Froilan Gallardo,
Mm.
who screens
Yeah,
for us. They've been incessantly red tagged. Over the last 3 years. Ang dami-dami. Nordis, sina Sherwin, no, and the Northern Luzon media.
yeah,
Walang tigil, hindi nagbago. If anything, nag-heighten yung red tagging because of the technology that is available
yeah,
now to the agents of the state. At the
yeah,
same time, because of Duterte's mandate,
yeah,
talagang I think kumalat on ground, no. So when we talk about red tagging, it's not just stupid people on social media saying
yeah,
komunista ka.
mm,
It's your face hanging from trees everywhere in your town.
Yeah.
and with messages actually going all the way to calling for your death, no,
Yeah.
by so-called anonymous
Yeah.
authors that nevertheless are we know are coddled by the military. So
Yeah.
kakasulat lang ni Sherwin last night na kahapon ng isang storya on the emotional toll of red tagging. And
Yeah.
even if you talk to journalists, it's very real because
Yeah.
panahon ni Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, again, kasi chair ako ng NUJP noon,
Mm-mm.
grabe yung banat sa amin. Andun,
Yeah.
inulit nila yung enemies of the state.
Yeah.
And somebody, I'm not going to say, he was a very high PNP official, friendly to us, who said, kinikasing kayo ng ISAF. So actually, they were kind enough, magkalapit yung mga business enterprises niya sa office ng NUJP, nag-timbre sila ng tao doon. No?
Yeah.
But kaya, nobody wants to live life having to look over your shoulders.
Oh, for sure.
And thousands of activists and journalists in the provinces
Yeah.
face this. Even
Yeah.
up to now. Even up to now talaga. Add to that pa, walang pera. Di ba?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nagre-reklamo man tayo dito sa Manila na minsan reklamo tayo ng sweldo. Nobody has it harder than a provincial journalist.
For sure.
Um, More than 50% don't even get minimum wage. They don't even get
Yeah.
wages niya, di ba?
Mhm.
And dozens, the pandemic really,
Yeah.
really tore down everything. So
Yeah.
dozens of the most established in the provinces, in the regions, dozens of those news outfits had to close down.
Mm-mm.
Or hindi na sila mag-print physically, they would go online. But then
Yeah.
they would have a hard time because bagong salta sila sa online,
Mm.
whereas the trolls and the
Yeah.
influencers were all there already. So, um, hindi pa bumabangon and it's very, very hard kasi pag tapos nag-eleksyon. So, ang hirap tumalikod sa temptasyon
Yeah.
na gamitin ang espasyo mo para sa mga politiko
Yeah.
dahil 2 taon kang gutom at totoo
Yeah.
namang gutom na gutom.
Yeah. Yun nga yung extra vulnerabilities aside from the pay gap. I
Oo.
think it's fair to call it na a pay gap din no,
It
between
is a real pay
uh
gap. Yeah.
right the
Yeah.
ako I'm based in I've been a metro, although I come from the provinces. I come from Butuan. More specifically, I've worked as a Manila based reporter all my life. um and beyond that also yung mga maliliit na bagay, yung mga resources, kotse,
Oo.
gadgets, kahit allowances man. I mean, those are the little things that um I think the average reader or watcher or viewer doesn't uh take that into consideration. But if you're not supported properly by your newsroom, it's quite hard to cover, ha? Parang um
Oo. Noon,
'di ba?
Bea, sinabi ko, um, madaling, okay, sige, matapang ako. I worked really hard when I was young also. But there was also the fact that I came from a comfortable family.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Pag hindi ka, journalist ka pa, hirap na hirap ka. Paano ka
Yeah.
magko-cover ng isang bahala ka sa buhay mo kung paano ka pupunta doon. No, maraming ganyan
Yeah.
eh. Can
Yeah.
imagine, tapos magkano bang kikitain mo pag nilabas yung storya na yan? So may mga ganung bagay. And more than that, ang media ownership structure natin sa
Yes.
karamihan ng even in the national and even in especially in the local press, no, and broadcast, ang may-ari ng mga dyaryo ay malalaking politiko o di
Yeah.
kaya malalaking negosyante.
Yeah.
And syempre ginagamit nila yan para sa
Yeah.
kanilang interes. So
Yeah.
even though journalists will try to stay honest, it's very, very hard to withstand, between corrupt owners or exploitative owners who
Yeah.
don't really care if your family lives or dies, and because they will not also look at your professional advancement. They don't care about that either, or your safety. And then of course the attacks that come when the powers that we think that we've stepped a line in reporting. So, ano yan, talagang pervasive yan na pressure and burden sa ating mga kapatid sa
Right.
probinsya.
Hindi, parang parating sinasabi, di ba? Of course, key to, like, key or crucial ingredient to a good democracy, to a healthy democracy, is a free press. And I think, kahit hindi natin kahit sa Jaman or hindi, minsan when we say free press, iniisip natin, yung mga ABS-CBN, na Manila-based, GMA, the legacy media here that are based in Metro Manila. Thankfully, we have institutions like Minda News, for example, na medyo ano na rin siya, kind of legacy in the context of, in the context of Mindanao. So parang we're very thankful na naging sustainable yun, and it's thriving, right? But I think, what can we do? Tayo, you're the boss of regions for Rappler, but like, even for the average listener, people who are listening or watching this right now, like, how can they genuinely support media, especially media that's based in outside Metro Manila?
Okay. Um, marami sa inyo, marami, maraming mga NGOs, na may pera, pero
Mm-hmm.
na hindi necessarily political. I would suggest that you partner with media organizations. They need every little help, you know. They'll be
Yeah.
willing to give you some space and some airtime. And your organizations naman are hindi naman talamak ang pinagsasabi niyo dyan. So that's an additional public service with which umabot ma-reach nyo, no, ang inyong audience, the local audience, because not everybody is on social
Yeah.
media. I think you should part mag ano partnerships with them. I also think that corporations who understand that it's a free, responsible media that helps, protect democracy, could band together and offer ang dami-dami diyang mga, like NUJP is all over, just say, meron kami ditong lugar, pwede kayo dito mag-forum, pwede kayo mag-training, pwede kayo yung mga maliliit na bagay na ganyan.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, advertise with them,
Yeah.
but try not naman to choke them by demanding that they write only nice things about you, ganon. But I think let's say Rotary. Hindi ko alam. I'm just throwing
Yeah.
ideas here out there. Lions, all this think up, essay writing contest
Yeah.
and let a consortium of media organizations organize this for the students. Kasi sa totoo lang, unless we encourage our students to write,
Yeah.
walang mangyayari. They will be vulnerable to all this disinformation. It is in writing where we learn critical thought and we learn to put down yung ang ating thoughts in an orderly way. So, yun, maraming bagay. It doesn't need to be earth-shaking
Yeah.
for them to help our local media.
Yeah. I like your last point, because I think it also ties to the idea of, like, for example, even ako, I got into journalism because I was allowed to write, and like, allowed in the sense that I was given space to write and pretend to be a journalist when I was in grade school and high school. In that respect, my God, napakapangit ng kopya ko nun. But it gave me space to dream na, at least in the context of my age bracket, marunong ako magsulat, kaya ako mag-report. And then eventually, it led to an actual career in journalism, in national media. But I think it's also important to give that space. It's even more important, I think, to give that space to writers, journalists, would-be reporters based outside of Metro Manila, and those who don't necessarily dream of coming to Metro Manila. Kasi, frankly, why would you want to come here? It's congested. It's a very
My brother, the late Nonoy Espina, was
yeah,
happiest in the province.
right.
He came here because there was a job, but he was never
Yeah,
happy. I could see that,
yeah.
and he was so happy when he went back. And maganda pala, marami ngayong mga fellowships, including the Jaime Espina Clima, no, na
Mm,
meron din ang Rappler doon, na nagbibigay ng mga grants for the underreported stories, and especially gearing this for reporters and teams in the provinces.
Right.
Kasi
Right.
imagine mo kung meron silang support, kasi ang Pilipinas, sa totoo lang, magkaiba-ibang unique na mga circumstansya kasi archipelago tayo, but our main problems are similar across the country. So you can imagine if somebody from Luzon, somebody from Mindanao, somebody from the Visayas,
Yeah.
they all work on a water problem, and then we see
Yeah.
na, ay hindi pala tayo isolated. We have the same, we can in in the in to strengthen democracy that really helps. And at the same
Yeah.
time, it allows provincial media cash trap, problematic sa logistics to
Yeah.
have the opportunity to dig in into these stories na we probably in the national media take for granted. Kahit
Yeah.
tayo, alam natin, ang hirap magastos,
Yeah.
mabusisi sa panahon, and we need time out from the daily grind to do these stories. Ang ganda-ganda 'pag ang province merong opportunity for that. And it's
Yeah.
happening
And
now. Hindi lang klima, yung ibang
yeah.
nakikita ko rin sa ibang grants.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to link to the story page of this episode resources, including sa NUJP. Para if you're watching this and you have a lot of extra money, maybe you can open your purse. Kasi parang, yun nga, it's important to rally behind journalism, especially journalists not based in Metro Manila and not as in a privileged position as the two of us are kunwari right now, but it's important to, beyond posting, sharing, open your purse if you're capable. Kasi yun yung pinaka concrete way siguro of helping them. Kasi sabi nga parang important yun for democracy. Anyway, to wrap this up, and we'll make sure to link the resources, also including reports of the regions on the Rappler and maybe even other publications as well. Yung kasi the idea of the show is to make sense of where democracy is heading. But to end this, what do you do? What do you watch, read, or um, indulge in when you want to make sense of the world?
Okay. What do I read when we work with words? That's what we do. We read everything we can get our hands on every day. There are times when um, parang ang gulo-gulo. Kaya pag nangyayari dyan, it always helps for me. It's not, while I'm a voracious reader, while I'm a bookworm, um, my go-to when things really get tough and I need some silence in my mind and some space so that makita ko yung mga patterns, it's music. It's not
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
That's what I lose myself in. And then I'll go to, I always love reading um, historical novels, of
Yeah.
times na I like to lose myself in in Pico Iyer and all those great travel writers that talk about cultures and Brockman systems. And always I get out medyo relieved and fresher and ready to face the world again.
Thank you again, Inday, for your time today and for giving me time again today, even if I had to run away last minute last week. Thank you for watching. Like may shameless plugging na nangyayari ngayon, but support Philippine journalists, not just Rappler, even if this is on Rappler, but obviously all of our colleagues in Philippine media, especially the ones who don't have the same privilege and opportunity to be as public as we are in our struggles as journalists. Support your local journalists. Marami silang magagaling dyan. Di mo lang sila kilala. Kaya hanapin mo sila and support them as best as you can. This has been Beko Pin. Thank you for watching 36 years. I'll see you next week. Bye.